Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You're tuned into, forgive me, so sorry. You're tuned into Newcastle Fast FM here on the Baker broadcast. Welcome back to your Monday night mind meld of amazing conversation, inshallah. And I'd want to thank all of you for tuning in. My apologies for us running a little bit over, but we were just getting some technical stuff sorted just before then. So assalamu alaikum from myself and assalamu alaikum from our special guest, Dr. Abdul Haqq.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Yes, subhanallah, it's been a tremendously diverse week again. But just before we get into that, I just want to quickly say that obviously this discussion is open to you all. Please do get involved, like, share, and subscribe. We do read all our comments, and we're going to try better than I certainly did last week to get you involved in all our discussions. And so do get involved in that way. Last week we were looking at the concept of identity, and we discussed a couple of sort of ideas across a spectrum of things, and we looked at what was legitimized citizenship, we looked at resistant citizenship, and we looked at undetermined citizenship. And the question we were looking at is, what does it take to make a difference? What does it take to create and affect change? And we looked at the idea of polarization, that when it comes to our identity, that there are multiplicities within that. And within that identity of having multiplicities, there's also a complementary side where it all comes together, but there's also conflict that comes from that. And this week, inshallah, Dr. Abdul Haqq, we're going to explore that a little bit more. But firstly, I just want to say to you, as a fan of Liverpool, congratulations.
Thank you very much. I didn't expect that from you. And yes, this has been a very, very joyous few days for me. And just so you know, when the last time they won the Premier League is the year I took my Shahada.
Oh,
so this has a double emphasis for me. And my children now, I have children, so they've never seen it in their lifetime. So yes, I accept that. Congratulations wholeheartedly as a 45-year Liverpool supporter, mashallah.
Oh, mashallah. That's longer than I've been born. So subhanallah, that's some dedication, man. So I just wanted to share that because, you know what, love. It's all about love and respect. So yeah, and it was an amazing thing. And I think as we sort of ended our conversation last time, that's what we were looking at, the idea that people can have different identities, but people can come from different places and still choose to connect with different elements of their identity.
That's right. Yes, absolutely. And I think that we also spoke about having that national identity, and I said how proud I was to be British, and I gave the reasons why, and that there are pointers, there are signifiers that we hold on to as well regarding elements of identity, whether it be sport, whether it be other cultural aspects that bond us, that bind us together. So I think that yes, this is yet another one. There are Liverpool fans all over the world. In fact, it's not just a national thing that's there, affinity that's there. It's an international one. For us as Muslims, obviously, that's the main bond. That's the main form of solidarity. Tawheed, that connection to the one deity, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's the ultimate one that everyone, we hope, in the world aspires and subscribes to eventually, inshallah.
Inshallah, alhamdulillah, and jazakallah khair. And I think just as we explore sort of this idea of complementary and conflict within identity, because that is where we see a lot of divergence, you know, people sort of splitting off and finding that resolution of which part of their identity is coming in first and which part of their identity is being pushed back, and whether that pushing back of an identity is a repression or is actually a benefit to the individual.
Yes, and what I want to do this week, Wajid, is what I want us to look at. We did speak about I mentioned 4 constructs actually from my research that I'd done in my PhD, and you're right, we mentioned legitimizing identity, which is that law-abiding citizen. We mentioned the resistance, the opposite to that, those who become disillusioned and start kicking against the system. Then we mentioned, as we said, the undetermined identity, which is more applicable to the youth who are finding themselves, are not quite sure of where they are. And then we spoke about the hybrid one. Remember, I gave the thing about, do you support Pakistan or England when it comes to the cricket games and stuff like that. Now, I want to place those identity constructs on a mosaic, on a template. So I want to give a very basic illustration for the viewer and you to understand. So if you look at an axis, you've got at the top opportunities, and that's pulling in one particular direction. At the opposite end of that, you've got threats. Okay. That's at the opposite end, and that's pulling opposite to the opportunities are pulling up, the threats are pulling down. Then when you look at the horizontal axis that goes across now, you've got strengths on one side, pulling in one direction, and you've got weaknesses on the other side. So you've got this axis here. Now, all of those, this is a actual framework, and some might know what the words that I've just described there as the SWOT: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But if you place that on the axis, they're all pulling. See that as a critical force field now that's pulling out.
Okay.
If you put
because we do this sort of gets looked at in sort of a business sense. Yeah. But
yes,
what we're looking at is this is being applied to an individual now.
Right. What I've done, an individual, but looking at the society and that framework and that critical forces that I've described, I've been applying that not just in the business or corporate sense. Now you can apply it individually. So, for example, if you place that all in societal context, what are those societal opportunities? What are those societal threats?
Okay.
What are the societal strengths? What are the societal weaknesses? So, for example, I'll give you a weakness. There may be those who find themselves marginalized due to racism. So that's a weakness of the society for that particular individual. Okay. What are the threats that can come from that? There's a threat of marginalization, moving into disparate groups, even radicalization, far right, religious extremism. These are threats that are there for those who are disenfranchised and are positioned in between the weakness and the threats. There are so many weaknesses, so many things that they have as disadvantages that they're disillusioned. They cannot see the opportunities societally. They cannot see the strengths societally. So they're positioned in this particular quadrant and they're at risk of falling below the margins even more. Now, that's those who are in the resistance identity construct. That's where they're firmly positioned. Okay. When you look at the undetermined, you might say, okay, what about the undetermined? How are they in that societal framework? Move them across. They will be between strengths, that quadrant of the strengths, and the threats. They're not quite sure. Do we love the society? What they're growing into society now. They may have been leading a sheltered life. So they've had everything given to them by their parents, by the school, by the college. As they're growing and they're realizing some of their aspirations that they cannot achieve, they may become disgruntled. They may become disgruntled with society. They may become disgruntled in themselves because they're not quite sure. They've realized, for example, you've left school, you've gone to college. It's been pretty easy. You've gone to university. You've had a utopian ideal almost an existence. Then you get your degree. You've got the student loan for that £9,000, whatever it is, every year. That's now a debt on your head. You leave university and you're thinking, remember, you're looking at the strengths. I've lived the privileged life. My parents have helped me. I've had my loan. Then you realize I can't get a job. My degree doesn't mean what everyone was telling me my degree meant. You have to start psychologically reassessing who you are, where you are, what you can do. That starts confusing particular individuals about who they are. They're no longer going to say to you, yeah, I can recognize the strengths in society. They will be so disillusioned. They'll be saying, well, I thought all of these things were positives, but I'm without a job. My degree hasn't meant anything. I'm in debt. I thought this would be the platform for me to step off in my life. And then that identity construct can start changing. They can move from undetermined to maybe resistance. The ideal as parents was us to put them through these channels so they become a legitimized citizen, a legitimized identity, taking the benefits and the strengths, recognizing the strengths of society, and grasping on the further opportunities that are there. But that hasn't happened. So can you see the societal context that our identities are formed within?
Mm-hmm.
And those strengths will mean different things to different people.
Yeah.
Some will face different weaknesses.
Because I've kind of just drawn up that sort of thing there. I mean, excuse my writing. I'm not a doctor yet, but that's kind of sort of there.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah. So what we're looking at here is this is the undetermined bit where you've kind of got a strength, but you're kind of feeling that threat. Where do you fit in? And the opportunities that are up here are not quite as open, or the pathways aren't as clear. And so on. So that undetermined individual then is probably going to move into one of the other blocks.
Precisely.
And I think that's quite a profound point, in the sense that when you think about an individual, or if I try to bring an abstract idea, if you watch like a sports, I don't watch much tennis, but when I get the chance to, I love to watch tennis. And there's a time when you can watch a game and you can look and think, that guy's not going to win. You can just tell by the body language, it's gone. Right. The guy's, the mindset, the psychology, the lethargy, there's a spring in his step that's just disappeared now. It's not going to win that game. And I think there's a very fine line, where you see individuals come back. I don't know if you remember when Rafael Nadal came back to beat Federer in one of the greatest Wimbledon matches that I've ever watched, finals. But it takes that tenacity and that mindset and that mentality. And so is this where, Dr. Abdul Haqq, we're talking about individuals who are going to make that decision based on what then? What are they going to make that decision based on?
They've got to, what has to happen is they've got to look at various aspects of themselves and their character. What was the platform upon which they were raised? Now, this is why it becomes important regarding religion, for example. Now, we know from Sheikh Hussain, if I can cite him as an example, where he mentions and distinguishes 3 types of youth, 3 categories, if you like. The first one being the rightly guided youth. The second one being the youth who possesses corrupt beliefs. And the third one is the confused and doubtful youth. So we have to ask ourselves, how have we nurtured our children? And with the social media age today, I think there cannot be a parent in the Western world who doesn't say or doesn't admit the challenges that have happened with our children and that disconnect between our children because of their attachment to the social media world now. They are digital natives.
Yeah.
So they are going to be getting a lot of instruction and engagement and influences from sources that we cannot control as much as we like to. My children go on, my younger children go on at particular times. They do particular things. We screen them in that instance. But even their friends, we don't know if they've got the same control. And they're influencing themselves via social media, introducing them to maybe all permissible things. But we are not that sole source and determining factor in their development now. So when we're looking at our children, we have to take these things into consideration. And it's quite a daunting task when you're looking at your child and you're thinking, I'm communicating with my child, but the impact I'm having upon them is not as emphatic as my parents would have had upon me. Because I wouldn't have disappeared into the social media world. I might have gone and seen my friends and spent time with them, but that's easier to monitor for our parents than to go into this rabbit hole of social media. And this is the problem. So while we're speaking to our children, understanding them to be one particular way, and all we can do is guide and instruct to the best of our capabilities, there are a myriad of other things taking place that are unseen and unknown to us.
Yeah, I think
and that child knows that.
Sorry, go on.
That child knows that, so he or she will know whether we are penetrating the surface or we're just touching upon surface issues, and we don't know the underlying things, because those underlying factors they've shared with colleagues, peers, who that peer group is developing with. So when coming back to your question, how do we know where they are or what is taking place with them? We can only gauge to a certain extent now. And I will add this, and it might seem very esoterical, and we've got to keep making dua, because we know the dua of the parent for their child is accepted without doubt. We've got to keep making dua.
Yeah, subhanAllah, there's so much there to unpack. And okay then, so I'm going to start with this point, because you mentioned Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah, whose writings I've only read in English.
Sheikh
Ibn Taymiyyah, okay. SubhanAllah. So I was thinking about Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah. But nonetheless, an eminent and great scholar. And there was something you said that about the confused and doubtful individual. And
yeah,
I appreciate what you're saying, that we can talk about children in this way. And again, it's like, I suppose the way I would see it is that, kids like all of us human beings, they're seeking a place, they're seeking belonging, they're seeking a place in society where they are safe, and they have they can almost self-actualize to a certain level, and feel a part of something bigger than just themselves. And there's that element to it. But then when you sort of go a little bit back from there, there's this idea of sort of being told, like, I run creative writing workshops, and there's nothing more frustrating when I hear somebody say, well, just be yourself, because I find that so frustrating, because the idea of being yourself means that you know yourself, and you don't really know yourself until you've had that opportunity, that space to explore yourself. So one thing you said was we're touching on a surface, but we don't know that bigger underlying questions, discussions, experiences, and life that's gone on under there for that individual to arrive at this point that you'll just start to, like you said, scratch the surface on. And I think there's so it's just like, if we flip it on ourselves, and like if we move into that idea of being confused or doubtful, or move into that undetermined stage, from what the Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah has written and has expressed, where does that sort of guidance come from then? Because ultimately, and I think we touched on this in the initial part of our discussion as well, Dr. Abdul Haqq, was that it's very easy to read the text. The Prophet ﷺ said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, okay, got it. Yeah, I've memorized it. It's plugged in, got it. But that's not enough, because it hasn't seeped in, and it hasn't connected with my soul in that sense of, as an individual, that what does this really mean to me, and how does this make me from undetermined to determined?
Very good point. And you'll recall in Ramadan, when we first started this initial interaction, I introduced my cognitive development framework, where we spoke about those 4 stages. The founding stage, which was the very initial awakening stage, the youthful stage, which was that idealistic, overzealous phase that we moved to. And those 2 stages were very abstract in their understanding. They were, as you said, reading the Quran, reading the Hadith, and okay, I've read the Quran, I've read the Hadith. Now what do? I'm not actually feeling it. It's actualized. We're thinking of a yesteryear at the time of the Prophet ﷺ in a different environment in the Middle East or wherever, and we don't know how to implement that within the context of our immediate lives and the wider society. But as we start moving and traversing the paths of experience, we start moving towards that adult phase, which is when we start actualizing, we start experiencing the reality of the evidences that we've learnt, the dictates that we've learnt from the religion. So we reflect back on those first 2 stages and begin to comprehend and understand those better because of our life experiences. And then we move to the mature stage, which many of us hope we are moving towards. The younger ones want to move towards that, where we have a wisdom, where we actually, before we advise others now, we understand what they're going to be going through to a greater extent, because again, as you know, I gave you that example of the different levels of a building, and that we have traversed and climbed all those levels so we can see a horizon that the others cannot see, because they haven't climbed those, but we know what they're looking at those lower levels, because we were once there ourselves. And I think, referring to what Sheikh Uthaymeen was saying again, looking back at the third type of youth, the confused type of youth, I want to describe what Sheikh Hussain said here in brief. And he said, this youth, he recognizes the truth and he's happy with it. He's been raised in a guarded environment, but temptation has been open to him in every direction, which has caused doubt in his mind. Let's go back to the social media example. And so his beliefs are tested in this instance. And he fluctuates between two extremes of his upbringing as a Muslim and these desires that have been caused by the exposure to society's ills. And then Sheikh Uthaymeen adds and says here, this type of teenager is passive in his life or her life. He is in need of captivating strength, which will guide him towards the enclosure of truth and the path of goodness. This type of teenager, this type of youth is found in abundance. They obtain a smattering of Islamic education, but they acquire much more secular knowledge, which conflicts with the basis of the deen, either in reality or their presumptions. Thus, they are helpless between the two cultures. And I think that is profound insight from Sheikh Uthaymeen to say that about the confused youth. They've got the academic education, they've got the basics and smatterings of Islamic knowledge, and they like it. They know about the seerah, they know about the rules and regulations of salah, they love Ramadan, but there's that pull from the wider society, the peer group pressure, social media, and they keep fluctuating between the two.
Yeah, and again, like you said, it's not that cliche, sort of individual that fits in this kind of category. It's people from all sorts of backgrounds, and like you said, when that doubt has been put in at some stage in their life, it's what causes that crack in that foundation that keeps sort of preventing that progression and that growth to the next level. And it's cementing over that, because when you mentioned the other two, so the first one is the guided one. There's the second one that you mentioned was the who is corrupted, and the one who's corrupted, it's very clear in the sense of what's going on. That direction, that path, you can see. That type of friends or that type of places hangs out, or that type of activities being carried out. So it's a very clear sight. Whereas those that are, like you mentioned, confused and so on, it's a different situation then.
Right, but we've been given, this is the beauty of the deen. We've been given instructions, and we've also been given guidance and pointers. Like we know from the Prophet ﷺ, where he describes the bad companion as the one being with a blacksmith, and that you stay with him and he may burn your clothes, and at very least you will get some of the soot and the smell from that on the clothes. And the good companion was likened to the musk seller, and even if you don't get any musk from the individual, the fragrance of the musk will rub off onto you. And sadly today, and we were like that when we was younger, we prefer the mischievous, the bad boy impression. And I'll share this with you. When I was younger, and some of my really good friends, they used to tell me that because I was quite mischievous, I became a bit of a rebel when my mum and dad divorced. So I was always fighting in primary school, and I didn't care. And I used to see sometimes girls I knew and boys, and you see their mum grab them tighter and like, don't talk to that boy, he's very naughty in school. And they gravitated more towards me, because like, yeah, this is the individual we want to be with.
This is the forbidden fruit,
So this was something, and friends of mine said that to me. In the end, when I got to know them and I got to know their parents, I was like, he's a wonderful child and everything. But those impressions were there. They didn't gravitate away from me and others. And I knew people who were worse than me in behavior and more mischievous. And it's like, yeah, he's cool. He's the rebel. So, rebel without a cause and everything like that. And that's something we've got to show our children, that the soul, there's going to be an innate inclination towards that type of individual. But then we need to check ourselves and ask why. And we need to check ourselves and ask, is this the direction we want to be going towards. So that second corrupted type of youth, we need to make sure that our children can identify them. They need to be conversant with the hadith and the understanding of the deen, that whilst that thing may look pretty and attractive and draw you in, that surface, what lies beneath, can be quite poisonous. And they've got to be aware of that.
I mean, I want to move on back to the quadrant in just a second, but just to unpick that little bit, what you've just said there, you see, because you can kind of see somebody taking a bad idea and going down a road, but ultimately, these people have a bit of charm and charisma about them, don't they? And that's where they get so that's where the allegiances and the biases and they become struggles, don't they? I mean, if somebody was just bad and you went and spoke to them and they were just bad to you, then they would repel those types of anybody getting involved with what they're up to. But the fact is that they tend to be quite charismatic and charming and eloquent and all that sort of stuff.
There's a reason for their charisma. We've got to realize that those who are charismatic, those who are like that and attract people to them, they are in need of those individuals to be drawn towards them. It's a self-validation. This is a quality that they have and a skill that they have, and they will use that skill to draw individuals in to self-validate. And when those individuals stop self-validating, and you just have to look at psychology and generally, and maybe our children, we have experienced it, the moment you maybe see some kinks in the armor of that individual, or you become used to them and like, this is just all they've got to offer, and you start withdrawing, then you will see the reality of a number of these individuals, because they will turn on you.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Because like you said, if they're not a one-trick pony, they're definitely going to be a two-trick pony, and it'll get to a stage where they start to unravel, because there isn't anything, that cloud of mystery has arisen. Yes. And you see them for what they are.
About being wary of he whose speech will dazzle you.
SubhanAllah,
and he swears to Allah that he's upon goodness. But then when he's told, we see further on, when he's told to fear Allah, he becomes the most haughty and rebellious in the land. But his speech dazzles you.
SubhanAllah.
So Allah warns us of these particular characters.
And again, and it's that what is being said and how that aligns with the ethical and the ethical understanding and the moral values that an individual has. I just want to go back to the quadrants here, and I just wanted to explore a little bit in this quadrant here, Dr. Abdul Haqq, in the ideas of opportunities and weaknesses, and understand what that does that look like, because we looked at resistance in the sense of being between weakness and threat. So there's no real power, there's no real authority, there's no respect, and there's even almost the bottom of the hierarchy, and no given any sort of space to vocalize or be anything. We looked at the idea of undetermined between strength there, but what happens between opportunities and weakness then?
Very good. And in that quadrant is where the hybrid identity lies. That hybrid identity being an individual who mainly we see from immigrant populations, for example. So they're within society and they may be deemed as other. They may be being looked at as though they are not quite accepted by the wider society. So they feel insular, they feel insecure, they feel marginalized. They are still harking back to the society where they've come from, whether they be refugees, whether they be immigrants who have come for career perspectives. So they remain entrenched in that weak area, but the opportunities start arising when and if, or if they can start seeing and grabbing onto those opportunities, and they're being treated like equal citizens to realize those opportunities. So let's give an example. Imagine how the Windrush generation are feeling now, that they've come from Jamaica as children, from Guyana, where my mum's from, South America. They came as children, and they excelled and they worked and they were an intrinsic part of the society. So they've moved from being feeling as the alienated other, and the racism they may have faced in the 50s, 60s when they came over. And now they're feeling we've seized the opportunities of society. We are part of society. They may even have started moving over towards realizing the strengths of society and sharing in those strengths. And then suddenly they're told, you don't belong. You are not a part of this society. So that opportunity that they'd moved into and they'd seized upon, they're plummeted straight into this area of weakness, not by choice.
Kind of moved,
not by choice.
straight down to here, and they've moved into an area of being threatened now. If I can just quickly take a moment to say assalamu alaikum to Sister Salwa. Jazakallah khair. I'm going to look this way and read out your comment. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you all. Please do like, share, and subscribe, and get involved with this discussion, because it is open to you. And we're going to read out what Sister wrote here, and she says that yes, we all have our differences, different experiences, and different religions. So the mercy of Allah is through His guidance, and all we are to know is written for us. We have to seek the knowledge to understand ourselves and understand the human being, good or bad, and how we got to where we are. So to put Sunnah to practice, we need to stop and look at our schedule, put reading of the Quran and ponder, and make it easy on ourselves before we eat, before we leave the house. This is all of the elements of making dua, of saying Bismillah, and seeking protection from the shaitan is what I can read at the moment on the screen. So yeah, your response to that, Dr. Abdul Haqq.
Yes, wa alaikum salam, Sister Salwa. Good to know you're with us again. And Sister Salwa is right. I think that we know, as we've been told by our scholars from the Salaf, that the Sunnah is like the ark of Noah, Prophet Noah alayhi salam. Whoever embarks upon it is saved. Whoever chooses not to embark upon the Sunnah, because we've got these etiquettes before we eat, and this is for our youth as well. Bismillah is so important to say before we eat. It's so important in virtually when we're putting on our clothes. The dua for when we are leaving the home, the duas before we go to sleep. These are elements that bring blessings, remembrance, and safety. And the youth today, if they're not familiar with these things and not just saying them, as you said, when we're young, we may just say them, but to ponder and think about them. When we're saying La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, and that's part of the dua when we're leaving the home, there is no power or might except with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Who then will we fear? What circumstance will we become worried about? When we are saying Bismillah in the name of Allah, we're not saying it in anything else, in Allah's name. That's total reliance upon Allah. Allah will not let us put a foot forward and that foot is on shaky ground if we are remembering Him and calling upon Him. So what Sister Salwa is mentioning today, many of the youth marginalize that because they're saying, well, it doesn't do anything for me and it's just an incantation. No, it's not an incantation. This is what the Prophet ﷺ has come with to show us how to lead life successfully. And I want to just conclude on the part that Salwa was saying. Before I became a Muslim, I satiated myself. I fed myself mentally, intellectually. I looked after myself physically with food and my exercising and everything else that I was doing. But there's another dimension to us, the third dimension, which is the spiritual dimension. And you could either feed that rotten rotten food, or you can feed it with the proper nourishment. And I realized when I came to Islam that the deen in its totality was that permissible, halal, complete nourishment that would then provide that equilibria with all elements of my life. And so that is important what Sister Salwa's brought to us, and Jazakallah khair to her for bringing that. And some may not connect with that. And if that's not the case, then they need to ask themselves, why are we not connecting with these elements of the religion, and be patient with ourselves, because there is nothing else. Please, viewers, non-Muslim viewers as well, understand that when we say Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in, thee alone do we worship. Remember, there's statues and all these issues with statues at the moment, and everyone's saying we want to keep the statues, let's pull the statues down, let's remove the statues from our heart. Iyyaka na'budu, you alone, Allah, do we seek in worship. We worship. You alone do we worship. iyyaka nasta'in, and you alone do we seek aid and help from. And this is not no weak, esoteric, hopeful, wishy-washy, religious thing. This is a reality. And I can say to anyone watching now that as a convert, I attest to this reality in just that verse that I've mentioned to you there.
It's triggered off a whole load of thinking from what Sister Salwa's comment is, and the way, mashallah, you responded to that, Dr. Abdul Haqq, and that is, you know, when because the consistency is required. You know, it's like if you can't do a press up, but you start every day, bit by bit, by the end of X number of days, you'll be able to do a press up, and then you'll be doing this many press ups, and so on and so on and so on. And that regular repetition will obviously strengthen your muscles. That's just naturally going to be a byproduct of you continuously doing something. And I think, like you mentioned about the incantations and du'as, that there is a benefit that finally comes through. I think one of the things I wanted to bring, Abdul Haqq, was this idea of how we've, for lack of better wording, then I'm just going to say it in this way, and maybe we can work out the wording, but have we become too sort of modular and westernized in the way that Islam is taught, in the sense that it has become a sort of a classroom activity rather than an actual, you know, when we talk about Islam, we talk about a deen, we talk about a system of life, a life system of how we approach things, you know, from the moment that we wake up to the moment that we sleep. There is all of this in there. And do you feel that maybe we could take a slightly different approach to how we embed and ingrain these ethics and morals within ourselves, that it goes beyond the classroom?
Absolutely. And I want to hark back to what we discussed in Ramadan again. When we look at normal but simple village life and people living in more rural areas, and you get this from the Quran and who it was addressing at the time, they are and were more in touch and in tune with the elements around them. And as you've said, the teachings of Islam within the Western society have become so modular now that there isn't that time to ponder and reflect on what we are reading and what we are learning, and in unison with what is around us and our natural environment. In that instance, our children, if we brought them near animals, they would be squeamish and afraid of them. If we left them and went camping for a while to sit under the stars, there'd be complaints that there's no electricity or there's no Wi-Fi, and where's the toilet with all the mod cons and everything like that, and where's the nearest McDonald's and everything. You know, bringing some sheep or some steaks to cook. They might say for the first day, this is a nice barbecue experience, but when they realize, hold on, we're here for a week and we're doing this every day, and having to go to the river to what, the appreciation for life is different when you have these experiences. And we've been detached with city life from those experiences. And I saw a question come up, or a comment come up from a sister, Carol Dickinson, where she's wishing there was an IDC near her. It's so hard to learn and seek knowledge in a non-Muslim village with no mosques and no centers for reverts to go. And I empathize with our sister in that respect then. And I would say to her, may Allah make things easier for you, but my advice and recommendation would be then to seek out some good communities online where you can actually communicate with them, sisters on Zoom, and interact in that particular way. It's not the ideal thing. I think many of us are now, especially because of lockdown, on social media, Zoom and other platforms. The ideal is to be with each other. And I think that once we get through this particular pandemic, inshallah, which looks like it's going to be with us for a little while, we should then cherish and yearn and seek out that company of each other. And inshallah, our sister will be able to find others in the near adjoining villages or wherever, where she can engage a lot more. And I'm seeing, just before we continue as well, I've seen that there's someone here, Inde Tia. My father is a Muslim, but my mother is Japanese and did not raise me as a Muslim. I'm confused I'm a Muslim by virtue of my father, or do I need shahada? And she says the word iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in is revolutionary during that period, as we can contact Allah. Even Muslims find it difficult, how much more non-Muslims. And mashallah tabarakallah, I would say to sister, if your father has raised you as a Muslim, you are a Muslim. There is, to my knowledge, there is no need to retake the shahada unless you were raised and there wasn't Islam in the household and there were other practices and you didn't consider yourself to be a Muslim. There was no Muslim ritual or anything like that. And if you were raised as a Muslim, like our children have been raised in our household and they are Muslims, and there's no need for them to take shahada. However, again, if you've been raised more according to your mother's lifestyle and you're no longer with your father, then there's a consideration that you need to look at and possibly speak to a local scholar or call an individual, explain your circumstances, and they can then say to you, yes, possibly take your shahada, or no, there's no need to take your shahada. And yes, iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in, you alone do we worship and you alone do we seek aid from, is revolutionary. It turned a whole society at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam upside down because of that. Because of that tawheed and singling Allah out alone. So yes, my sister, it is revolutionary. And in actuality, looking at the current crisis across the world, again, I repeat, with the idols and the divisiveness and polarization, the entire world is in need of focusing upon tawheed and learning and knowing that verse that I've just highlighted to you.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. There's just one other comment from Umpa Abdul Waqil, and so they've said that dunya is a way of life. Dunya is a way of life as well, sad but true. So no one has to be patient when calling to our way of life, and it's best to be the example. And the following comment is about mu'min. If we teach our youth to be grateful in Allah, in return, during life, they will be grateful and humble towards their parents, and by such things, by being humble in that way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards them greatly, inshallah. And just to sort of
very quick,
yeah,
because interject to speak, that's a very key thing. And regarding a particular hadith, the sister has mentioned something, and this is something that we need to realize for our children, for ourselves. And I want to highlight that. And this was a narration where we could see an individual, a companion, a Sahabi called Hanzala al-Usayli. He met Abu Bakr, and he said, Abu Bakr asked him, "How are you, O Hanzala?" And Hanzala said, I replied, "Hanzala is guilty of hypocrisy." Abu Bakr said, "Subhanallah, what are you saying?" He said, "I said, when we are with Allah's Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he reminds us of the fire and paradise, it is as if we are seeing it with our own eyes. Then when we depart from Allah's Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and attend to our wives, our children, and our business, then much slips from our minds." Abu Bakr said, "By Allah, we also experienced the same." So I went with Abu Bakr until we entered upon Allah's Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I said, "Hanzala is guilty of hypocrisy, O Messenger of Allah." So Allah's Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, asked, "And how is that?" I said, "When we are with you, you remind us of the fire and paradise, and it is as if we were seeing it with our own eyes. Then when we depart from you and attend to our wives, children, and business, then much of this slips from our mind." So Allah's Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said, and this is the key point now, to speak to what our sisters just highlighted, to show what is so true. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "By him in whose hand is my soul, if you remained continually as you are when you are with me and in remembering Allah, then the angels would shake your hands with you upon your beds and upon your road. But O Hanzala, there's a time for this and there's a time for that. There's a time for this, there's a time for that. There's a time for this and there's a time for that." And that's 3 times that he said that. So it's really important for us to know and to facilitate our children and let them know that there are times for various things. There are times for leisure. There are times for study. There are times for worship. We shouldn't be the parents, as some of us are, always browbeating our children about worship. And then they end up doing the rituals without the spirit of what they're doing. Once they see that we are okay with them with that balance, and we are upon that balance ourselves, then this is the way that we will keep close to our children, inshallah, and engage with them.
I think it just moves into kind of that idea of, you talked about self-validating, that as individuals, we can move into this idea of self-validating ourselves rather than being influenced and self-validated by others. So by doing that which we are obliged to fulfill as Muslims, our fard, and so we fulfill that obligation. But then alongside that, we give that time for that knowledge to permeate into the mind, like you mentioned about, the four sort of cycles of growth, where we move into sort of adulthood, and then from adulthood into sort of that wisdom of understanding of things. And I think, like you said, we don't take that time. And this was something we discussed in the beginning of Ramadan, that this is actually a moment for us to step back and reflect, right? To take that time and to be able to really just be, to actually just to be grateful, and just to, and that sounds like a bit of a platitude, and it sounds a bit, like you said, a bit wishy-washy and esoteric. But in fact, I mean, when you look at the prophets, all of them, I come from the mountains of Kashmir, and I've been there when I've seen the people herding goats and water buffalo, and I've seen goats. Now, goats are a fascinating creature when you've seen them being herded, because they don't want to be herded. They're just not going to listen. And then they end up, because we live, like I said, in a very mountainous area, they end up stuck on some crag or some tree, and they're like, "Ma, get me down, I'm stuck." And then the owner has to work out a way of getting this creature down without causing it any harm to themselves and to the creature, and bring it down. And they get it down, and then the next thing you know, some other one's up there like, "Ma, you gotta help me out now." And they are the most stubborn, most difficult creatures to herd. But we saw many of the prophets doing that, herding animals,
Yes.
herding beasts. And like I said, I went from a very cushy lifestyle here in the UK to a place where water had to be brought fresh from the water springs, right? So
Okay.
so if you want to bathe, somebody's gonna have to bring that water for you to bathe, and there's a limited amount for you to bathe with. There's one type of water that's brought for your bathing and for the general washing and stuff. Then there's a different type of water that's brought for the drinking, and it's not from one tap. Do you understand? And it's not hot water to bathe in either, so there's a whole shift of things. And I think when you move into that sort of area of taking time to really appreciate it, like you said, I think there's something there that's kind of missing, where we're not able to, as what's been highlighted here by the brothers and sisters in the comments, is that there has to be that sense of moments of really being able to step back and allow that to happen.
No, absolutely. And I think as we're moving towards the latter parts of this show now, we've spoken about the quadrant and the strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and threats from a societal perspective. Now take that same framework and apply that individually and the relationship with Allah. So what opportunities do we have in this deen with Allah? What strengths can we achieve with Allah and through our worship to Allah? What threats are there that face us in the event of us being neglectful of inward reflection and nurturing of ourselves and self-validation? And what weaknesses are there that we can identify within ourselves? And how can the deen, how can our faith help us to eliminate those and move towards the strengths in that instance? So we've talked about that quadrant and the framework that I've referred to, that I've developed in a societal perspective. Let's now reflect on it in an internal, personal perspective as we are drawing to a conclusion in that instance. And I think that's very important. When we can look at things societally, macro, and then bring them microcosmically to ourselves, that's important. And an important message to the youth: in an era and society where, and it's been like that for time immemorial, where our peer groups we want to please, we want to validate ourselves with. We've got to not seek always to be externally referenced. What is important, and if we can inculcate that to our children when they're young, we should be concerned first and foremost of what Allah thinks, or what our relationship is with Allah, and how we look in the sight of Allah. We need to look at that first, and then we know that there's obedience with regards to our parents, and that's a major sin as we get older, to disobey our parents in that instance. So we need to prioritize who is it we should be looking towards to ensure that we are doing right, that we are achieving what we should be achieving. So external referencing is what social media is about today. We want the likes, right. We want the love heart, we want everyone telling us you're wonderful and you're fantastic. And you've got people living off that, and they know that the people who are validating them don't know the first thing about them. And it gives a full sense of security.
Yeah. And I think it's like you said, I think it's interesting what you talk about externally referencing. So it's like, I mean, I know I'm asking our viewers to like, share, and subscribe to this so they can, inshallah, get some benefit from it. But it's not for vanity reasons, inshallah. It's for
not
the
for you
sincerity.
To think, oh, we are wonderful. We no, and exactly, it's not for that reason. So in that instance, there's a different motive, there's a different purpose. I've spoken to individuals, and I was advising a very close friend of mine recently, because he's a very good speaker, and he's saying, I noticed that not many people are haven't clicked onto his new website or his new YouTube. So I said to him, that's not what you should be looking at. There will be prophets who come before Allah on the Day of Judgment with no followers, some with one, some with two. And I said that Allah tells the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, just like all of the Anbiya, that you are only to deliver the message. So that should be, and I say this for those who are communicating on social media and everything like that. No, you don't want dislikes and hates and everything like that, but that should not be what you're looking at. If you are delivering the message in the best way, in the proper way, that's all you should be interested in. And I'm not, you might say, do you practice what you preach? Yes. I try to do that. I'm not concerned. I'm really not concerned. I like to analyze and hear if there's criticism, is there anywhere things I can address where there may be misunderstanding. But to sit and wait for the likes and like go to bed at night like so many people, no, this should never be the intention. And if any of us feel that, because we know that our soul inclines to those sort of things, we need to fight that. We need to fight that. And like, I'm just going to deliver the message. If 5 people like it or don't, it's not the concern. Alhamdulillah, the message is there. Yeah. If some are critical, is it a valid criticism? Let me engage with them. Let me address that. But not, I've got thousands of likes. And the young need to learn that. And we as adults who are now on social media, we need to be careful of that. And as Abdul says, Jannah should be the goal. And remember, those who have an ounce of pride in their hearts and the wrong type of pride, like, look at me, I'm getting attention, then the doors of the many gates of Jannah will be closed for us. So the intention, and we need to teach our youth that. Stop looking for validation and external referencing, because you will lead a sad life if that's your premise of validation.
But it's the weight of these words that need to be understood. And I think one of the things you said, and I discussed this with you during Ramadan as well, was that, my children and I, we've started to go through the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's had a profound effect on them. But as much as it has them, it's me. SubhanAllah, I've taken so much from revising, from the children saying, what does this word mean? What does that word mean? And really dissecting the meaning so I can explain it to them. So in order for me to do that, I need to understand it as well. Yes. And I think that interaction has been really powerful. and you know, even my kids, you know, my youngest, hustling me from for stuff, you know, saying, Daddy, you know, you're not being merciful. Allah is merciful. You should be merciful too. And you know, asking for extra screen time or whatever it is, just, you know, hustling, but at least understanding that, you know, Allah is Ar-Rahman Rahim, that no matter how nice my dad is to me, Allah is beyond my imagination. That, you know, whatever Allah, my dad is providing for me, but you know, Allah is Ar-Razaq, you know, and he's providing something beyond me. And I think we need that sort of reflection, you know, to be able to do that. I'm very aware we're hitting sort of 9 o'clock, and it just wanted to sort of bring the matrix back into sort of view there. Now, as we've sort of said here, we've got the opportunities, we've looked at weaknesses, we've looked at the threats, and sort of the strength bit. Now, we haven't quite touched this. Shall we continue this next week then, inshallah?
If you like, or we can touch upon that very briefly, because this is where, if we're looking at a societal perspective and an individual perspective, this is the legitimized identity. This is the individual that is, inshallah, on a localized level, that one who is stronger in their iman, that one who's finding the fruits of their worship and seeing the strength of practicing the sunnahs, of saying the dua, of doing their 5 daily salah, and engaging, as you said, pondering over the names of Allah, who's really, and tasting the sweetness of iman in that instance. And the more he tastes the sweet of iman, he or she feels stronger, and they realize the opportunities even more because their iman is growing. On a societal perspective, they're active, they're compliant, everything is moving in place with them because they're doing the right things in their life to make those things happen, with their worship, with their balance, a time for this, a time for that. So they are legitimized in their identity. They're in the most comfortable and secure place. And that's the place where all of us want to be, societally and individually.
Yeah. And I think, see, I think we kind of live sort of like, I just show you that sort of that wave. And I think that's kind of how we live. You know, we have these sort of peaks and we have these sort of troughs of things. But what we're really trying to do is kind of have it so it looks more like this, where you've got these moments of reflection here. And here you've got these moments of peak awareness, you know, that idea of nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But you allow yourself those other moments to really deeply reflect. Because when that deep reflection happens,
go ahead.
Yeah. So
I was
when
going
that
to say,
deep,
I've got a take on that. I'm going to let you say, and I've got another take on that, different take.
Okay. So the way I'm seeing is, if it's a strength and an opportunity, is that when you have that strength, you dive up and you push up further and higher, and you capture those opportunities because you have the strength to rise up further and higher. And I think this idea that sometimes get bandied about, this idea of life balance, I think it's a misnomer, really. You know, you don't do equal amounts of things. You know, going back to the idea of identity, that there is times when it requires us to fully immerse ourselves. You know, whether that's fully immersed, you know, like right now where we're here talking in this way. You know, when this show's over, we're going to go back and be dads and husbands and children and sons and so on and so forth. And so we take those moments where we fully immerse ourselves, and that opportunity becomes fully ours because we work to our full and true strengths. But
Absolutely.
that takes that sort of awareness and opening.
And also, additionally, I think it's interesting that you drew that depiction. I see that as peaks and troughs as well. And we know from our deen that iman increases and decreases. And we know from Allah, He tells us, فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْأُسْرِ يُسْرًا إِنَّ مَعَ الْأُسْرِ يُسْرًا. Verily, after difficulty, there is relief. Verily, after difficulty, there's relief. And so we know from the explanation there that there's a double relief after that one difficulty that we have. And we have that assurance from Allah. And that difficulty may be a long difficulty, and we're thinking, when is this going to end? As we saw in Surah Baqarah, when the companions with the believers at the time, and the prophet at the time said, when will Allah's help come? And Allah says, verily Allah's help is ghareeb, is near. So we must have that assurance. This is to do with iman. This is those who are in that quadrant of legitimized identity. They know the relief is going to come at that particular time. And the iman goes up and down. It goes up with obedience to Allah and servitude to Allah, and it decreases with disobedience and neglect of remembrance of Allah in that particular instance. And we've got to do the book recommendation before we end.
Yes, of course, inshallah. Yes. So I just want to quickly show that, because I've kind of filled those quadrants in now. I feel like I'm going to shout bingo. But yeah, so we've looked at the opportunities, and when we looked at the weaknesses, this was the hybrid identity which we looked at. We looked at here between the weaknesses and the threats, and we said this is where the what do we say again? Sorry, subhanAllah. The resistant kind of thing. Yeah.
Resistance identity.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then between the threat and the strength, we looked at this idea of being undetermined. That there's a risk of moving more towards this way and that way. But as we've just discussed there, and briefly, and inshallah we will explore this a little bit more, hopefully, inshallah, between opportunity and strength, this is where we become the legitimized identity of knowing ourselves, of, like you said, of knowing, not, in fact, in that area, you're not even being patient. You just know that Allah's help is there. You know that even you don't have to look back, that you are being propped up, you are being strengthened, that everything within you and everything in your fiber is being helped by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is not a matter of waiting. It is incumbent to be there. Subhanallah.
When I saw that typology, when I studied my PhD in 2005, and this was we reference as academics to S.R.A. Renani, and he did that in SOAS University. And that's just one typology. I had to look at a number of typologies, but then to build that to where we are now, to give that dimension to where we are now, I think is fascinating. Talking about it, as we said, on a macro societal level, and the framework I've put that on is one that I developed from my MBA days as well. So bringing that all together and transferring that onto a landscape and mosaic that we can apply to ourselves, I think is very, very important in the context of what we're looking at societally today. And the reference I'm going to give to the book is called Native, Race and Class in the Ruins of Empire by Akala. And many would know who Akala is. And I think that the link is going to be put up at the bottom of the screen at some point. So Natives, Race and Class in the Ruins of Empire by Akala. And this is speaking still to the current climate that we're looking at with regards to what's happening in the US with George Floyd, his death and the subsequent and previous deaths, and what's taking place not only in the UK and America as well, but globally with this drive. Today we were seeing that they're looking at reviewing the Black history curriculum, not only in the US, but in the UK. So that's a book I think some would find it's not expensive, it's inexpensive, and I think they'll find it a very enjoyable read. Akala's a very powerful voice amongst young people today, a very intellectual individual. I don't know him, but I respect the work that he does.
Yeah, I believe he recently got his PhD. I don't know if it was last year or the year before as well. But inshallah, we will talk about sort of your background. I think we haven't really verified and clarified that for our viewers and our listeners, inshallah. Okay, so Jazakallah khair for the book recommendation. I think subhanallah, we've covered so much. I just want to thank everybody for getting involved with the discussion. Jazakallah khair. We do our best to try and answer your queries and at least read out your comments and add to our discussion. And so yeah, liking, sharing, subscribing only benefits other people, inshallah, as much as it does for you, inshallah. So please do continue to do so. Inshallah, I think that we can close up there, inshallah. Dr. Abdul Haqq, are we okay to do that? Yeah?
It's asking for the link for the book to be put up, and hopefully Hussain is there to do that.
Yeah, Hussain has put the link up. Yeah.
Excellent.
That's it, inshallah. So yeah, I just want to thank you all very much. Jazakallah khair for your patience this evening. Do apologize for myself as your host that it took me a bit longer to get us online, and I apologize for that. And inshallah, next week, inshallah, Monday, 8 o'clock, we will be back on. We'll hope that you've taken something from it, inshallah. Again, if there's any further conversations or answers, questions that you've got from this, do bring them up for next week, inshallah. We will continue this discussion from then, inshallah. And I just want to thank Dr. Abdul Haqq for his time and his expertise this evening. Jazakumullah khair.
Yeah.
And inshallah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.